はまだ殺さない。お前たちの運命は
Finally, let's talk about the Toguro Brothers. And in brief, I don't have a copy of him. I don't plan to get a copy of him, and that's why I have to base my discussion on him via the Langrisser page. So, very quickly mentioned, the Toguro Brothers is basically more or less the time and space factions version of Leon. It's slightly different, but more or less that's how you can define the Toguro Brothers. Okay. The way Toguro Brothers work is it has access to a demon class as well as a cavalry class. Okay. In terms of the soldiers, you have vampire bats, which is probably the most common soldier. You have bone dinos, dragoons, gargoyles, and undead knights for the 5 mobility soldiers. As for the 3 mobility soldiers, you have skeleton knights and orc berserkers. So, infantry, demons, cavalry, and flyers are the soldiers that Toguro Brothers gets access to. Okay. The talent, body manipulation, is very, very PvE oriented, even much more than Leon's. Okay. The effect is that after taking action, you gain the buff body fortification, where your attack and skill increase by a certain percentage based on your star level. Okay. This body fortification buff can be stacked up to 15 times, so theoretically you can get a maximum of 30% attack and 30% skill increase, which is massive. Okay. In addition to just getting the stacks after taking action, you can also gain stacks before attacking and entering battle, as well as after defeating an enemy. So the more the Toguro Brothers fights and kills things, the stronger they get. Obviously, this is very PvE oriented because in PvP, the most important attack is your first strike. If you can kill the enemy with every single strike, that's what really matters, right? The fact that Toguro Brothers gets steady stats increase over combat period means his talent is not PvP oriented at all. Okay. Finally, because Toguro Brothers is either demon or cavalry, right? Well, this is a big flaw because cavalry characters are not good in truth in PvP, right? Most tanks can run Lancer soldiers, and if you're using a cavalry character, the Lancer soldiers will totally stop the amount of damage that a cavalry character can do. So the cavalry class would be great for PvE content, but it's not good for PvP, basically. So overall, you can conclude more or less Toguro Brothers is not meant for PvP. So, I did mention that he is very similar to Leon, and I'll go over why. It's because of his transformation skill, 120%. Okay. While similar to Leon, it does have a big flaw in that the cooldown is 6 turns. Okay. The effect of it is, when used, you can move and attack again. You can move 3 tiles and attack again, so just like Chivalry, right? You also gain a buff 120%, where all stats beside hit points are increased by 20%. This can't be stacked with fusion powers. And for every square move before combat, attack is increased by 5%, up to a 15% attack increase. In addition, unit restores 20% hit points if the hit point value reaches 0. This can activate once over the course of duration. And finally, after attacking, you can move 5 tiles back. So it lasts 2 turns, and you lose 90% of current hit points when 120% ends. And all effects of this skill cannot be dispelled or be immunized against. So very, very similar to Chivalry in some ways, right? You move again 3 tiles, and then you can strike with higher stats. The differences are, first, while 120% is up, he's basically invulnerable, because he can, even if he's killed, he gets to restore 20% hit points. Right? The second difference is that after attacking, you can retreat 5 tiles rather than 3. Right? But this part of getting 15% attack increase is very similar to Leon's damage increase from his talent. And the other difference would be when this buff wears off, he does lose 90% of all current hit points. However, keep in mind that the Toguro Brothers can attack and retreat in a way where they retreat back to their tank's guard range, right? Due to the 5 retreat movement. So very easy for the Toguro Brothers to attack and retreat and get out of range entirely. So you're always going to bring this 2-point skill. The other 2-point skill is kind of your choice. Toguro Brothers has Onrush for 1.5 times damage, and also a defense and magic defense increase for that combat turn. Or he actually has this other skill, Flick, which allows the Toguro Brothers to actually attack at 2 range with melee soldiers participating and do 1.3 times damage. So the drawbacks of this skill is that first, it does knock back the enemy 2 tiles, which you don't always want at all. And second, it does this is a bonus, it inflicts attack and skill decrease of 20% on the enemy. So pros and cons to Flick, right? Less damage, there is knockback, but you do get to attack at 2 range. So, as for the 1-point skill, he does have a few that are pretty useful. For example, he has Blast, where as long as unit hit points is above 80%, you take 30% reduced damage. He does have, let's say, this Form Shield, which is luck based, but when entering battle, you get a 30% chance to inflict attack range -1 on the enemies. And this effect has a 2-turn cooldown. Being able to reduce enemies' attack range can be massive. If characters have just 1 attack range, and it gets reduced to 0, they can't attack, right? So while this is luck based, if you can force the enemy to be unable to attack for 1 turn, it can be game changing, especially in PvP. Right? But very, very luck based, because it's a 30% chance of occurrence. And finally, he does also have boost for additional damage, where when entering battle, attack is increased by 7%. So there's quite a few choices in the 1-point cost skills, right? You can increase your damage further, you can apply this Form Shield debuff, and you can also choose to get an extra skill point, so that he's at 6 skill points, so that you can bring 120%, right? You can probably bring Onrush, and you can bring Flick, right? So that's the other method of building him. If you choose to build him up to 6 costs, you can then bring both attack skills and his buffing skill. So from this, overall though, you can see that he is very similar to Leon as a physical damage dealer. The big drawback is the much longer cooldown on his transformation skill, and otherwise, that really sums it up. In action, you'll see that the Toguro Brothers are very, very similar to Leon in truth. For example, in this video, you'll see the Toguro Brothers, who are in Demon class in this case, activate its Chivalry skill, in this case it's called 120%, move forward 3 tiles, and then attack at 2 range and retreat. Now of course, we saw in that battle, there were some problems with the Toguro Brothers. First of all, because they're pretty much a standard physical attacker, the Toguro Brothers failed to kill off Zerida, who presumably had last rites, which kept Zerida from getting one-shotted very easily, right? But the fact that the Toguro Brothers can be both cavalry or demon class, so that would be 3 movement or 5 movement, and they have a skill, Flick, that allows them to attack at 2 range after activating their version of the Chivalry skill, which is, I think, 120%? Yes, 120%. That's what makes the Toguro Brothers pretty interesting. So, very unique character for sure, where they can move up and then also attack at 2 range, and then because of 120%, they're actually able to retreat 5 tiles back after attacking, as opposed to Leon's 2. But at the end of the day, you can say that they are ultimately very, very similar to having Leon, and at the end of the day, if you already have Leon fully built, you truly don't need Toguro Brothers, you know. So that pretty much sums it up, you know. Overall, I would say the Toguro Brothers are very much more a PvE focused character, who can attack and retreat, and is part of Empire, Space and Time, and Dark factions. And there you have it. So that is pretty much a quick conclusion to how the Toguro Brothers work. In terms of gear then, if you're in the Cavalry class, you use pretty much the same gear as Leon. Even if you're in the Demon class, I believe you can use very similar gear anyways. I'm not quite sure about the Demon class, but I presume that in the Demon class, he can continue to use, swords and heavy armor and so on. And at that point, that's pretty much everything I wanted to say. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you found this information useful. And on that note, Nitro out.